Welcome back, everybody. I am so sorry about that. We are bouncing away to the music in the background over here more than anything is really what was happening, if I'm honest with you. So thank you for the grace and letting me come back on mute for a half a second there. Welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody gave themselves some space and had a good stretch and got some water on our break. Once again, I want to thank you for taking the time for joining us here today in our Connected 2024 conference. And it's important to also just remember that today is March 4th, World Obesity Day. So we know that we have friends and colleagues and other patient communities out there taking time today to talk about obesity. And that really has been the theme for World Obesity. World Obesity Day this year is let's talk about obesity. So we think that's a really important piece. We also know we wouldn't be able to talk about obesity the way that we are without our fantastic sponsors. So I just want to thank them one more time today for all the things that they've done to make today happen. I'm really excited for you guys to be back, and I'm excited for this next session. It's called Making Yourself Heard, Being Your Own Advocate and Ally. As we heard from both Tara and Dr. Sajwani this morning, showing up for yourself and really being that informed patient is an important part of the process. But it's also really important to find your voice. And I think we're going to spend some time talking to some experts today who are going to join Ian and I as panelists. And we're going to have a really great conversation all about making yourself heard. So I'm really excited to have us joining us today, Candice Vilhan and Dr. Sanjeev Socklingham. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about them as we, look at these faces and feel like, seriously, I get to see so many humans I adore today. It's one of the best days. So Candice is with us. Candice is a certified bariatric educator and a behavioral therapist with a really impressive tenure over 2 decades at the Ottawa Hospital Bariatric Center of Excellence. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree with a combined major in psychology and sociology from Carleton, and has been a lifelong student in the field of obesity and behavior change. Candice's passions lies in assisting patients in identifying their strengths and leveraging tools for managing the chronic disease of obesity. She works seamlessly with both surgical and medical programs and provides mental health assessments and fosters support and collaborative atmospheres, contributing significantly to the holistic care of patients and their caregivers. She gets it and she understands that whole picture, and we are so excited that you're joining us today, my friend. As well, we have Dr. Socklingham, who is a professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto and is the director of the Bariatric Surgical Psychosocial Program. I am going to trip on that every time, sir, at Toronto Western Hospital University Health Network. He's a clinician scientist and vice president education at the Center of Addiction and Mental Health. He's a very busy man, and he's also a really important person to us. He has over 200 peer-reviewed publications, several large research grants, and we are really, really fortunate to have his stewardship as the scientific director of Obesity Canada. Welcome, both of you. Yay. Are you ready to rumble? Are you ready for a good conversation here? I promise it's going to be fun.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Fantastic. We've had a great morning so far, and I think this is going to be a conversation where we're going to pick up on a lot of the threads that we kind of introduced earlier today, and I think we're going to start in a really good place, which is kind of around empowerment. So I want to thank everybody again for coming today, because we're talking about a topic that historically really has not been given a lot of attention, or attention that it really does deserve. People don't even like saying the word obesity. I know I have said it more than once, that even when I first started volunteering with Obesity Canada, it felt really awkward to even just say the word obesity. It felt like knees and elbows to me. But the good news is that those times are changing, and the narrative around obesity is definitely evolving. And as we just shared in our earlier sessions as well, we know no one chooses obesity. We know that this is not a problem that is created by our patient community themselves. There's a world of genetics, emotional factors, a ton of things that are out of our control. But let's be really honest, as Ian and I can attest, as we are both patient advocates as well, man, it really did feel like it was our fault along the way, didn't it, Ian?
Yeah, it absolutely did. And I think this is something that I think we wanted to really get into with this particular conference. So we've done this connected conference 5 times. This is our 5th one. So the previous 4 ones that we've done, a lot of the discussions that we've had, a lot of the topics that we've covered have been about the science of obesity, talking very specifically or in depth about the individual treatment options that are available, and kind of educating around those things. And if you're interested in those discussions, you can actually find a lot of those recordings on our YouTube page or on our website. But I think what we wanted to do with this one is kind of shift gears and talk more about kind of moving beyond that, and how do we get away from this shame and blame, and talk about, have these difficult conversations, and kind of move past this. So this session is about speaking up and being heard. However, we are also talking about a population that is often living with a lifetime of shame and blame, uh, and feeling empowered or having enough of that empowerment to speak up for yourself is not always easy or natural. So for those of us who dread having these difficult conversations about obesity, what are some of the ways that we can work on that empowerment? And I wanted to first kind of go to, oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm just checking the chat here. Candice, I wanted to kind of reach out to you first here. You and I have a lot in common on this topic. So I wanted to kind of get your perspective on this, because we both work professionally in this space in obesity, and we both also have our own lived experience with obesity. We both help people living with this disease every day as allies, but we also have to sit on the other side of the table when it comes to our own health and our own care. So for me, I know sometimes I have difficulty being confident, or having that empowerment myself, uh, or the same level of that empowerment for myself as when I'm supporting someone else. So if you take off your professional hat just for a moment here, Candice, is there something, is this something that you feel as well? And what do you do when you feel that way?
It's a really good question. I think that my echo by sounds a bit.
No echo for me.
I think that as someone that lives with obesity myself, it is challenging because I will advocate for my patients, I advocate for my friends, and I have had apprehension advocating for myself. 100% agree. And one of the things that's been helpful for me is sometimes I'll look at a situation.
I think we are having a little challenge with your
That,
audio, maybe
that's
for
what
a
I was
second.
saying. I think it sounds like it's no, I don't have the audio open on the main stage. I'm just checking it.
Why don't we let Candace sort her audio a little bit, and maybe I'll swing over and talk to Sanjeev for just a second while we kind of get you sorted for a second, my friend. We'll come back to that. But Dr. Sockingham, so lovely to see you.
Nice
I
to see
know
you
that
too.
in your career, you have spent a lot of time at what I'm calling the intersection of mental health and obesity care. And I know for me, that shame and blame moment that we were just talking about and trying to move out of it really still plays a part. And I sound like a sage. Like this is like 8 years since I've had my surgery. I should have all of this sorted out, obviously, right? But genuinely, it feels like it is a permanent filter on my life. And the patient community is absolutely where my heart is. And I know so many of us are coded in that shame, and we've lived with that internalized bias for so long that we don't even see ourselves as worthy of care. I would love to get your insights on the impact of that shame and internalized bias on accessing care, and kind of what is needed to support patients to move to empowerment and having a healthier relationship with themselves. Just a really easy one to get you started, my friend.
I was just gonna say, Lisa, you just threw me a softball on this one.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
easy way to start.
I have to say, first of all, kudos to you and Ian for co-chairing this session. I think this whole dialogue throughout the day has been so important, and I think it's important for the reason you just highlighted. I'll just reflect on. I've been working in obesity for 15 years, and starting in obesity program at Toronto Western Hospital. And one of the things, even before I started working in that program, one of the things that struck me is in reaching out to patients, there are very few conditions medical conditions where there's so much blame, guilt, displacement to people living with obesity, as opposed to really looking at the medical condition as it is, as a medical condition, and as healthcare providers, and I'll include myself as a physician, as a way of trying to look at how we can help people during their most difficult times. And it was one of the most striking things when I first started working in the field. And even though we have done a little bit of work, and Obesity Canada has done a tremendous amount of work, but many others internationally, there's still a lot of work to be done. And partly it's because just think about the decades of how we've been communicating to people living with obesity. You know, the eat less, exercise more, the fad diets, the industries that have taken advantage of people at their lowest points to really commercialize things and reinforce these messages for business models that are really not putting the person first. And also, if you think about the years of people who have had to hear these messages, now further amplified by social media, um, I think you can see why it becomes that inner script or that internalized weight stigma, which I call that inner script, that running commentary about it's my fault, I'm not doing enough, I'm failing again. Or if using my psychiatry or mental health background, it's the kind of cognitive schemas or the thought traps that become so pervasive of who someone might be in their identity in terms of living with obesity. And so to me, every moment now that there is a brief encounter where someone experiences even moments of that, even though we've gotten a little better, there are still so many moments and points that reactivate those thoughts, give them voice, give them power to start again impacting the individual living with obesity. And that is so demoralizing. And I can only imagine the courage, and I tell it to my patients in my practice after every first appointment that I have with someone, is that I'm thankful that they took the courage to come speak to me and tell me about their journey and share with me some of the hardships that they've had and open up so vulnerably, especially in a system where we continue to inundate and bombard patients with the message that it's all on them and they haven't done enough. And so I think as providers, it's our responsibility to be able to acknowledge that courage, validate it, and help to build together as a partner with a patient the the journey back to addressing obesity care. And so that's why, to me, I think that's part of the ownership of the healthcare profession as a whole to be able to do that.
I love that so much. And we just had a fantastic conversation with Dr. Sajwani as well, who has said the same thing. And I really made us slow down for a second because she was talking about like an intake experience where, she simply is saying to someone like, I believe you. And that is such a huge and monumental piece. And I heard you just echo that same sentiment of like, we're going to listen and we're going to acknowledge that you are not that stereotype necessarily that's been fed to you your whole life, that you're lazy, that you're dumb, that you just don't get it. You can't figure out how to eat less. What's wrong with you? Can you tell this was my internalized talk track at all, Dr. Soklikan? But it is really an important part of it. And we did also, Ian and I have talked about this ourselves, as people who are continuing to navigate our chronic disease that we live with. That talk track, you're right. As much as I can have other and new information, that is a really well-worn path in my brain, that when things are hard, it can look like the more appealing path because it is so well-worn, to just go back to going, you're right, I should be cut off from my medication. It's not actually meant for me. Should have never really had it, potentially, all of those moments. Like that is so big. And that validation of the patient needs to be a really big part of it. How do you help patients validate themselves though? How do you get them to join you in the moment?
Well, I think it's first my responsibility to first show that I have listened and understood their journey. So I think, part of that is, uh, again, I do this at almost every first appointment, is to relay back what I understand of the many different causes, biological, psychosocial, environmental, that may have contributed to that person's journey in living with obesity. And then I check in and say, did I get it right? I know it's the first time I'm meeting with you, but this is what I heard, and this is the start of me understanding you. Did I get it right? And usually, thankfully, patients are quite come forward and say, yeah, you got it right. There's or I might revise this little piece here. And I'm like, that's perfect. That's what I want to know. That's our work. That's how I'm understanding it. I'm going to learn more about you so I can work together as a partner in this to try to help you on your obesity journey in terms of treatment and management. So that's the first one. The second is, I think we need to get people living with obesity the right information
Mm,
and weed through all the quick fixes and the media and all the myths that are out there to get back to do we understand now as a psychiatrist. And maybe it was part of a coincidence that I happen to be fortunate to be a scientific director for BC Canada at this time, but we now think of obesity as a brain disease, right? Like as a brain condition, right? And our brains are so closely linked to this, right? How powerful is that for someone to know that it's not about willpower, it's not about their identity or who they are. We wouldn't say to a cancer patient, we wouldn't say to a diabetic patient even, that it's because of willpower and your lack of ability to make changes in your eating and exercise and other parts of your life that you have this condition. We would never dare to say that, right? And so it's important just to be able to give someone that information, because then that's one step towards empowerment. Having that knowledge and awareness can then help someone. And some people feel so passionate they end up educating others as a result of
mhm,
that. Sometimes it takes time because it's hard to communicate that after years of hearing another message, but eventually it can be empowering. So I think education and awareness of for patients is important. And equally, as again healthcare providers, we should be thinking about how we're educating and empowering our future healthcare professionals with this
mhm,
knowledge as well, right? So I think the impact of weight stigma and bias, but also the neurobiology of obesity, all should be things that should be common knowledge to all healthcare professionals as well. So I think there's an important piece to give that information, but also to teach that information more broadly.
mhm.
Yeah,
We need to do something with it, right? It's the doing that is actually gonna
yeah,
foster that kind of change. And again, I appreciate that you used the word courage at the beginning as well, because it really does take a lot of courage to push back in these moments sometimes as well. So Ian, maybe let's go there for a minute, because I know you and I have spent a fair amount of time in the patient community and we have our own personal lived experiences. It is not for a lack of knowledge or understanding. I could quote chapter and verse on calorie counts and all of those kinds of moments of all of those things that we've been told are the answer key. So we are smart people, but we often have been so stigmatized for so long, and we have our own internal bias that it's really hard to bust through that. So when we finally do, and we have that courage to speak up, it is that much more important to feel heard and seen. Would you agree, Ian, from your perspective of working in the patient community? Like that is a really big cornerstone moment at the beginning of everyone's journey.
Yeah, and I think we see that in our Connect community when people first come in, and prior to that community, you see people online in like peer support groups and stuff like that, and they initially start with the standard kind of narrative around obesity and around weight. And they're jumping on fad diets or sharing those sorts of same messaging, right? And then as they get more informed and they learn a little bit more, those messages change pretty drastically. And you can see that it can be very empowering. I know for myself, that was a big turning point, kind of being able to recognize that, there are things that I can control, but there's lots of things that are outside of my control, or lots of things that are impacting this that my intense exercise that I was doing or my diet wasn't going to impact. So having that space to give myself some grace, and being kind of taught that by a health professional who was, in the know and understood this, was really, really important and powerful.
We know that psychological therapy and those supports are one of those really important pillars that we've identified in our clinical practice guidelines. And to me, and what from my experience was as well, having gone and been steeped and raised in all that diet culture and that noise as well, I had really distanced myself from my own inner voice to a degree as well. Is that something that resonates or something that you've heard other people say, Dr. Stockingham, along the way as well? Like you kind of lose yourself along the way because you want to distance yourself. I know like we had Tara this morning share her lived experience about her body even and wanting to feel almost disassociated from her body in some ways as well. Does that resonate? Does that something that you've seen?
Absolutely. I think the internalized weight bias, and when it becomes part of that narrative or that self-talk that emerges over time, that people can really be distressed by it. It can cause this disconnect or dissonance within someone, right? Like they're feeling what is being put on them from society, what has been re-recorded back into their brain, and it doesn't feel like them anymore, right? It feels so distressing and upsetting, and it can lead to body image issues, the low self-esteem. Is why internalized weight bias also is so linked to mental health complications like depression and anxiety, and particularly social anxiety, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no surprise that that distress manifests in that way. And for many many years, and still many people live in silence because they feel ashamed to come forward. And so again, I think it comes back to courage for those who are able to, but we also just need to be aware and ask so that we can offer that support to people. Because I think the support, like what's happening today, peer support or others who are living with obesity are important in terms of forming that connection. But also for us as healthcare providers, just being mindful that there may be something else there like this, where been that distress or that disconnect that is really not sitting well with someone, that we just need to tap into to understand, because that is the key to kind of unlocking that shared partnership with someone to be able to address obesity in its more fulsome way. Yeah.
Love it. Do we have Candace back? Are we going to bring her? Let's bring Candace back in. I believe we have solved some audio issues. We'll see how it goes. So Candace, what you missed is we were just talking about that, continuing talking about that internalized bias moment and the challenges that it takes to really have the courage to show up and kind of have that first conversation or those first asks for help and that support moment. So Ian, if you want to reframe where we were going with Candace, I think it still makes sense in the flow of our conversation to kind of go there and how you start with people in the clinic.
Yeah, yeah. So what I was saying, Candice, was, I sometimes have difficulty being confident and feeling empowered, or as empowered for myself as I am for the people that I work with, the patients within our community, when I'm trying to support them. So I was asking if you could take off your personal hat just for a moment, and is this something that you experience yourself, and how do you deal with that?
Absolutely. Now, can you hear me okay? I just wanted to check.
Perfect.
I am like the least technical person ever. So this is my
We got you, girl. We got you.
thank you. I totally identify with what you said, Ian. I am great at advocating for friends, for my patients, for other people, but definitely something I find that has been really challenging for myself. And I've had a lot of experiences, some great experiences with healthcare providers, some not so great experiences where I had hesitated to advocate for myself. And one of the tools that I'll sometimes use, and I think this has been helpful when I've shared with other people. So instead of looking at, it helps me kind of test reality a little bit. When I look at a situation, and I do have that self blame hat on at times in my personal life because of obesity. And I did internalize a lot of years that this was a condition that was my fault. Why couldn't I just get my head around this? I needed to figure this out. And even though I work in this field and I know it's so much more complex than that, in practice, it's different. In my heart, I felt a little bit different on that. One of the things I'll do is often I'll look at a situation, take a step back, and then ask myself, so if someone I cared about was in that situation, if a patient was in that situation, would that be okay? What happened? Would that be okay? And usually the answer comes to me a lot quicker if I substitute somebody else in that situation. And I found that to be a good way to kind of distance myself from it, because it just helps give me a little bit of distance to make that decision. And I've also been practicing more self compassion, which I encourage my patients to as well. And I'm trying to put that into practice myself, that understanding that role of advocacy, that, it's important to advocate for myself. And sometimes some of those conversations that I have create a ripple effect that actually help advocate for other people that are going sort of behind me as well with another healthcare provider or in a situation. And it helps raise awareness. So I definitely really in my personal life would agree with you 100%. It can be more difficult to advocate for yourself. But if you think about a loved one and you think about that situation, it just helps me reframe a little bit. Go, yeah, would that be okay if someone was treated that way? And usually it comes to me quite quickly. No, okay, how can I reframe it? What can I do differently?
Yeah, that's important, and I think, listening to you talk there, something jumped in my head, and it's something that I think is a little bit common with a lot of people within our community that we talk to. You sound like you're a fixer, so for your family and the people around you, and I find a lot of times when I talk to people like that in our community that have that characteristic of being a fixer, it's oftentimes other people before themselves, right? So they're willing to help out, and they think differently about helping other people compared to how they treat themselves. And I think that's sometimes a bit of a hurdle to get over.
Absolutely. And prioritizing self care, right? And I
Yeah.
talk about this a lot with patients. And so it's also something that I want to live in my life as well. So, I practice some of the strategies that I do when I'm talking with patients that also, I think there is so much blame and stigma around obesity for a lot of people, and really recognizing that this is a safe space, that this is a community that understands, and that you're not alone. And that's one of the things I try to create when, and we use the word patient because I work in a hospital setting, um, really creating that safe space. And often people will say to me, no one's ever asked me that question before, or you seem like you really care. And
Mm.
people can tell within 5-10 seconds whether you're connected, whether you care, whether you're compassionate. And I think that's something all all people need, but especially this community, because I hear a lot of people share stories where they didn't feel connected, or they felt dismissed, or patients will tell me, no matter what it is that I go to see this specialist for, or this family physician for, or whoever I go see, they always relate it to my weight or my obesity, no matter what it is. And this has happened in my own experience as well. And so that can be incredibly frustrating. And that shame actually can make things a lot worse and isolate somebody. And then sometimes people will just get to the point that they won't seek help because I'm
Mm.
anticipating, if I go and I seek support, I'm just going to get the same, lose weight, exercise more, which we know is not practical advice. It doesn't follow the clinical practice guidelines. If I'm continuously hearing that kind of rhetoric, then I'm not going to seek support. So I always say, if you've had a negative interaction or you experience weight bias, to talk to somebody about it, right? Seek support for that, because really isolating after can make your mood worse. Sometimes people don't seek care, and their medical condition can be worsening as a result as well.
I think that's such a really important point, and I want to pull it forward just a little bit and build a little bit off of it. And I know, again, Ian, this is a conversation you and I have had along the way, and again relates to my own personal lived experience as well, because the part that I want to bring in is this. We kind of touched on it with Dr. Sucklingham as well, that we're going to have these well-worn paths, that we're going to default back to shame and blame often. But I want to make sure people feel seen. If you're seeing this, my experience was also that I built up my courage. I asked for help. I had a very positive experience leading up to and through my gastric sleeve surgery. I had a fantastic surgical program. But then people around me who are in my like graduating class of my surgical program, for lack of a better idiom, they continued to lose weight, and all of a sudden I stopped losing weight, and I still wasn't achieving that incorrect level of success, which I now can say is incorrect level of success that I was looking for. But let's be honest, I wasn't losing weight. My body wasn't changing, and that's really what I was looking for. And rather than putting my hand up again, I isolated even further. And I know there are people out there who are in a similar moment, whether it's through surgery, through efforts of their own, through pharmacotherapy, whatever it is, where they feel like they've been given an opportunity and it didn't achieve the thing. I'm still to blame. That felt even like a coat of shame that weighed 10 times more than when I walked in the door the first time, because I felt like I had taken a spot in a surgical program that could have gone to a myriad of, oh my Lord, that thumb, a myriad of other humans, or that I had wasted resources. That I'm a smart lady. Why can't I figure this out?
Out.
And it
Yeah.
was really dark, and it's really hard. So as much as I love that we say, yay, you have courage, it's hard to pull yourself out of those moments. So let's go there for a minute and talk about that, and about that this is a chronic condition, and we are going to have moments where we're going to need people to pick us up again. Any thoughts on that one to either of you or Ian, if anybody wants to chime in? It's a big one.
Do you want to start? Go ahead, Ian.
I was going to ask if you wanted to start, but
Did I go somewhere we don't want to go? We could also switch
No,
gears.
no,
you're good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start on this. I think it's really important that we don't gloss over how difficult this is, and how there can be so many ups and downs in this, and the downs can be really, really difficult. And I like the term you said, this. It can be dark, right? Because that's when uh, Candace, I was saying when you had to step off for a second, that I use the thought traps, or the recording that goes on, that's been recorded over one's lifetime, right? Or whenever they experience their first struggles with obesity. And those kind of getting replayed over and over get louder and louder in those dark moments, and are not easy to kind of mute out or turn the volume down. And there's things that we talk about in our guidelines, in our approach to obesity care, that I think are useful tools. And one is just acknowledging that those moments are there, that they're expected as part of any chronic condition. Nothing is rosy and perfect. It's never a linear line in this. So I think that's the first thing to recognize. Two, that just the acceptance that it's tough, but that there are ways in which, sometimes just even a reminder that there have been lows before, and people have been able to get out of those lows and find ways to continue to work on themselves and their goals. I'm going to talk about goals in one second here. And then the third is that everyone needs a little bit of help and support at some time, right? We're human beings, and connection is so integral. If the pandemic taught us one thing, it's like human connection is so critical to our well-being. And so I think if in those moments, just to remind ourselves that we're not alone, and hopefully people tuning in here just recognize how many people are having the same feelings and thoughts and experiences, or very similar, and that there's a whole community and a whole group of people who are maybe experiencing part or some of, or fully what you're experiencing, and that there are so many who want to help one another to share their wisdom or experiences as well. It can be hugely, hugely beneficial. And the last thing is goals. Like I think you touched on an important piece, Lisa. I think working in an obesity treatment program, it's so easy because we're still stuck with BMI and stuck with all these measures and criteria for who's eligible for what treatment, and it all boils down to a number on a scale. And unfortunately, that number is so ingrained as part of that other kind of bombarded message. And it places a lot of expectations and kind of false expectations sometimes because of what we're kind of fed or socialized or sometimes incorrectly educated on. And because of that, when that number starts to go and fluctuate, it becomes a reflection of a patient's reflection of themselves. And I think
Mm.
it's important to really take a step back about the meaning of how we even think about and conceptualize treatment for this chronic condition, that it's not a number. If it was so easy and it's so simple, it wouldn't be the complex condition. It wouldn't be affecting 1 billion people worldwide, right? And so, how do we go about approaching this? It's because there are important goals to start to think about and reframe about our overall well being, our health, our families, like all of those things that are so important that go beyond a simple number. And then it may make it seem like it's not so important, these fluctuations in the scale or the comparison to other people who are going through similar treatments, that we can start to individualize and personalize each person's journey based on those goals, right? Their impact, again, family, their social networks, their quality of life, their work, education, all these things that are so important to overall well-being. So that's kind of my little rant on that. Right.
Yeah,
Love
and
it.
I think it's you made some excellent points there, and one of the things that I observe, um, kind of as a bariatric patient, a lot of us join like peer support groups online. A lot of them end up being like Facebook groups or something like that. So there's bariatric groups for our surgical programs, or for the province, or for some of us might be involved in a Canadian group or whatever. And one thing that I always noticed in that group, or in those groups, was that we go through our honeymoon phase where we lose a ton of weight, and everything's grand, and those people are posting 100 miles a minute in the groups, and they're everyone's proud and supporting, and they're really helpful for the people that are not gone through the surgery yet and are asking questions. And so, like, there's lots of positives there. But then sometimes those people drop off and they just disappear from those groups. And then you find out, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road or more, that they went through some regain or something that, now we know naturally is going to happen. There's going things are going to happen. And they got so much shame built up and internalized bias there that they can't even engage with this community that they were such an integral part of. And I feel so bad for those people. I want to just like give them a hug and like tell them it's okay. Like, there's people here that get it and understand it. And I think that's what we want to be able to do with our community, and with getting this information out there. But it's such a difficult hill to get over, that shame and blame and internalized stuff. And I think for myself, going through those ups and downs of weight loss and the yo-yoing, and even after my surgery, the regain that I went through, I think having the knowledge that I have now and knowing the things that we're talking about here today help make those peaks and valleys kind of smaller, not as long. Like prior to getting treatment and prior to knowing what I know now, if I fell off the wagon, it would be for an extended period of time, and things would get really bad before I finally had to do something different. And then now I think those periods are much shorter. I kind of have that ability to just recognize, okay, got to take a breath, give myself some grace, and move on. And I can, it doesn't get as bad as it used to, and things are better. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
And I think that's the point of it. I think part of today is let's call a thing a thing. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily good or bad. It just is. That is, we're all people trying to navigate this spinny world, which is hard on a good day. Plus, then we have this complex disease that is steeped in all this bias and shame and all of those things. So I think we've done a good job of talking about that, like internalized bias and how we show up for ourselves. Why don't we switch gears, Ian, and talk a little bit about that? Like, okay, now I'm ready to start talking about it with my friends and my family, and like extending out into that kind of support mode, and how to do that kind of safely, and what that might look like too.
Yeah, that's another good, interesting area there. You know, seeking out treatment for obesity, whether it's through behavioral therapy, medication, or bariatric surgery, is something that many people have a hard time talking about and expressing that or sharing that with the people around them. There's a lot of stigma tied to those obesity treatments. In patient communities, we hear all the time that people hide the fact that they got surgery, for example. That's a really common thing. They even hide it from their close family and friends. I know in my surgical program, they made it really clear that having a strong support network is really important to being successful post surgery. So, Candice, can you talk a little bit about why having a strong support network can be important to someone going through treatment, like a surgery, for example? And what might be some of the challenges that someone might face when they're hesitant to engage in that kind of conversation with people close to them?
Absolutely. I think that a couple of things I was going to say. In terms of support, it's really tough to sometimes approach people when you're thinking about surgery, frankly. A lot of my patients report that sometimes they get great support and people are really receptive, they're on board. And if you get that kind of support, make sure you tell people that you're really appreciative of that. Other times, patients get a response where people are genuinely concerned, right? This is a major surgery that they're contemplating. So there can be a lot of misinformation about surgery, right? So there may be TV shows they've watched, or they saw something on the internet, or those, I know a friend that did that and they, whatever, horror stories. It's almost like sometimes I compare it to when women are going through pregnancy. I know someone that had this labor complication. Nobody needs to
Mm-hmm.
hear that. But really, it's important to have that good basis of support. If you were going to look at bare minimum support you need for bariatric surgery, you're going to, at the bare minimum, need responsible adult to drive you to and from the hospital. You're going to need someone to, in our program, we don't recommend any lifting of anything more than 10 pounds the first 4 to 6 weeks after surgery. That impacts people if they're going to be doing any heavy lifting of groceries or if they have small children. Is there someone that can help me pick up my kids? Is there someone that can help me with that kind of thing? I also talk to people about, if you're living alone or, in general, what if you have a post-operative complication? You have someone that would be able to help you out, visit with you, um, and give you some support that way. I also think that sometimes there can be challenges in relationships. If you have a partner or partners, sometimes there can be a bit of insecurity come up. We've seen this as well, that partners sometimes feel insecure if they're not sure if you're going to leave the relationship or not. So, if you're not planning on going anywhere, sometimes it's good to have that conversation pre surgery in terms of, I'm not planning on leaving this relationship. And having those discussions, we really encourage you to have these discussions ahead of time. That said, if you've got your core support person, like at least one person, it is your personal medical information, so it's a balance. But if I could give you any advice, sometimes people have done this and it works well, other times it's gone crazy. So, you know, I always suggest picking a good time and place to have these discussions, have some privacy, having so you can talk, you have enough time to speak with the person about it, why you're motivated to do this. So, that can be helpful. Other people will choose to do this at a large family celebration or event, and sometimes get confronted by a lot of negativity. And it depends on your comfort level with that. So if you're approaching people one to one, it might be a little bit easier if you're not sure how things are going to go, or if you have a support person that you've already talked to and they're going to go into that family event with you, that might be a good strategy as well. And the other thing is to let people know, setting that boundary that I don't want to hear anything negative. Okay, that could be a strategy as well. And the other thing is that if I go back to the, pregnancy example, I always go back to pregnancy for some reason. It's kind of like naming your baby to some extent. So when I was planning to have kids and I put some names out there, some people will say, "Oh, that's a crazy name. I knew someone by that name. It was horrible." And they'll give you all kinds of opinions. But after you have the baby and you put that name out there, most people aren't going to comment on it. And if they do, it's already too late. So having your core support person is your people are important. And then if you decide later to tell people, that's up to you, your decision. But really having that strong base helps people be, I think, more successful, and working on those strategies ahead of time to have that strong foundation is really important before surgery so that you can navigate any of these challenges. And sometimes there's people you think, oh, they're going to be so supportive, and you may be surprised. And the reverse may be true. You might think you're going to get some, resistance, and somebody may be very supportive.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
other point I was going to add, just to interject, is to be specific about the type of support you want to receive.
Mm.
Sometimes people will come in even post-operatively and say, oh, they're not being supportive. Like two people will come in and say, they're not being supportive. So partner may be confused. I'm confused. So what specifically are you looking for help for? I want them to go for a walk with me. When? After dinner for 10 minutes. So if you can specifically make a request, they may or may not sort of be able to do that, but at least they're going to have a better idea of what you're asking for. Just makes it a little bit clearer for communication as well.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And I think, like, if I think back to when I went through uh, my surgical experience, the program that I went through, I would say I was fairly lucky. I had a really good support system with my family and the people around me. Everyone was really good about it. But I do remember a really awkward conversation with my father, and it was as I was being driven to my surgery. He was in the car driving me, and uh, you know, again, very supportive. He's very good about a lot of things, but this was a little bit interesting, and he essentially told me to be quiet about this. Like, this isn't something you need to share with a lot of people. And he made a point of even saying, like, specifically, I think it was my grandmother, like, don't tell your grandmother or other, like, we could just keep this quiet, and everything will be good, type thing. And here I am, this is basically my career. I talk about this with a megaphone and tell everyone and share my experience. So I kind of went in a different direction. But at first, I thought maybe he was ashamed of me. Maybe he was ashamed of, that I had to go through this, and he didn't want the rest of the family to know. He was going to love me no matter what. He was going to support me, but he didn't want everyone else to know. But I think it became pretty clear that it was more that he was really scared. He was scared for me, and I was going through this, and he didn't know. And I think post-operatively, now that I've gotten into this world, my family, my dad, my mom, and most of the people in my family and all my friends have learned a great deal about obesity and all these things because I've jammed it down their throats. But I think that's gone a long way in terms of, like, having that support system and allowing, like, I learned, I was educated, and then I was able to teach the people around me, and that was something that was really, really important. I was wondering, either Sanjeev or Candice, do either of you have any suggestions to people who might be a little hesitant or scared to speak up about these things to people around them?
Candice, why don't you go first, and then I'll follow.
I think when you're talking to someone, it's best to, I don't know if it's best, that's not probably the best way to say it. I think really, if you can educate a little bit or provide some information about obesity as a chronic disease, and giving them some information about why you're seeking treatment for obesity, if you're considering surgery, for example, because there is a lot of misinformation. Sometimes people, you know, incorrectly think this is a cosmetic procedure, or they don't really understand obesity as a chronic disease. People think, oh, well, if you just have you tried this before? By the time patients come to see us, they've tried everything usually, right? So, understanding, trying to get someone to understand obesity as a complex condition can be a challenge in itself, but I try to give people the benefit of a doubt and, provide education, talk about my decision. You also have to make a decision, I think, to some extent, trying to have positive people around you and trying to limit the negative. That's very difficult and easy to say if it's
Mhm.
family, right? Because of the amount of exposure you want to have with them. But also for your own mental health, sometimes some of those decisions are challenging, right? In terms of how much exposure or contact you want to have with people. But trying to be around people that are going to be supportive and encouraging, or at least are not going to make negative comments about, what you're going through. And people really are treated quite differently after surgery or after weight loss in general. Large majority of my patients report that they're treated better in a smaller body. And we see this because of weight bias. We see this quantified in the literature. And it leaves people with a lot of emotions. And they'll say, I'm really not that different. My
Mhm.
packaging may look different, but I'm still the same person. Now people are opening doors for me. They're more engaged in conversation with me. And sometimes that makes people really angry. Sometimes they like it. So we talk about that, right? We talk about that at the center as well. And we also have support groups and things like that too. But trying to decide who you think an ally is going to be, not not isolating, I think is really important, as you mentioned too, Ian. Through whether it be through Connect, whether it be through a bariatric center, whether it be just one person can make a huge difference. And knowing that you're not alone, I think is really important as well to engage with other people.
I would just, and Candice, you've covered like many of the things I wanted to say. Maybe I can just build on the great insights that you shared as well. That I do think it's important for people to recognize if you're going to disclose or communicate, um, whether it's bariatric surgery, whether it's anti-obesity medications or behavioral treatments, just even engagement in obesity treatment, I think it's important to know, um, to reflect on what the expectations are that you might be having of your support network. And I think all of you talked about that there are some people in our relationship circles, right, that are great at providing practical solutions and advice, but maybe not the emotional kind of understanding or validation. Those who might be willing to do very instrumental things like take you to appointments or, be there in the hallway, but may not be fully understanding and wanting to listen and comprehend what obesity treatment is all about. So it's important to kind of, I always talk to patients about, what are the expectations and impact on relationships, and also to acknowledge that some relationships will change for the better. Many will, but some won't. Some won't change for the better. And we know there's a proportion of people who do have relationship difficulties if their partners are not engaged in the treatment from the beginning. Um, have done a little bit of education themselves about the treatments, whether it's surgical or anti-obesity medications, um, or in those circumstances, sometimes partners or family members might be the people who actually were the people giving the information that started that re-recording in the brain of that track. Might be the people who actually contributed to weight stigma, right? Which can be
Mm.
quite difficult. So I think it's often a bit of reflection, and that's partly what kind of peers, healthcare providers can help with, or other supports to try to help that reflective process to understand who might be the people to lean on at these times and who might need a lot of work and help to get there, and who might be probably a long way away maybe we can defer to later on when we're in a better state of mind to tackle that one.
Absolutely. It's really twisty, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Dr. Suckingham, I know, like, we've kind of all seen those statistics. I think you threw one out today as well, like 1 billion people living with obesity, 1 in 4 Canadians living with obesity, which kind of like ostensibly means everyone knows somebody who has been impacted by obesity. And with that kind of volume, it would be nice to think that that level of impact on the population would result in empathy, but it really doesn't, does it? We don't have this coalition of support coming behind people living with obesity or those of us in larger bodies still. And instead of acknowledging that epidemiology, we continue to hear about obesity crisis. And we continue to see people living with obesity represented in those headless and faceless, very dehumanized portrayals in the news. Well, we get this relentless messaging about great medical breakthroughs. We're still seen as these like headless, faceless people. And I know I've heard you speak about the need for a collective effort in changing the narrative of obesity. I'd love if you can talk about that for a minute and what you mean by that and how you think that will actually help in this moment as well.
Yeah, I think, well, thank you for raising that one, Lisa, because that one is near and dear to my heart. Because I do think this is a collective effort, a global collective effort that's going to take time to undo a lot of the things that we've learned incorrectly or perpetuated over many, many, many years. And, you know, part of that is, as I mentioned, just the understanding of the causes, the multiple causes of obesity and how complex it is, how it's still addressing the myth and the incorrect fact that eating less and exercising more is going to be the all we need to do for obesity, right? It still perpetuates, even in medical training and all these things, other healthcare providers, but also lay public as well. We also need to think about public messaging as a whole. So it's great that media is picking up a lot of these things as well, in terms of
Is it?
obesity. Yeah, no, no, but I have a yeah, but I've got my yeah, but
Okay, good.
it's great that they're picking it up. It's not great that they use those images. Like 70 to 80% of those images are weight, are fat shaming or weight stigmatizing. So we've got a lot of work to kind of work with media on that. Like, how do you um, elevate the discussion and increase awareness without causing harm in that way, right? So we've got work to do in that area. I also do think that, I reflected on this, especially over the last year, that we sensationalize obesity treatments. Like bariatric surgery gets such a visceral response. Semaglutide and all the anti-obesity medications get a lot of press, but not so good press because of the right reasons. Like they start with the little honeymoon, and then they go into the stigmatizing, like everybody's
Mm-hmm.
using it and it's a fashion fad, which really perpetuates that this is not a health condition, right? When you're promoting people in Hollywood and all these kinds of things, and the jokes and the comedians come out, it really says this is not a real medical condition. That's the underlying kind of message in this. And so we really need to be strong voices as advocates. So jointly, people who are living with obesity, healthcare providers have to start urging media and policymakers to think about how do we actually provide correct information, retrain people on person first language and images for people living with obesity. And it's going to require collective effort. We all have to work together in tandem on the same team, because every time we have groups that go out and do the things that are harmful, incorrect, and have a negative impact on people living with obesity, it sets us back, 3 steps back for every step forward that we take. So we've really got to harmonize and do that, and it really takes a coalition of the willing. So everyone here today, but everyone on World Obesity Day who's really taking a stand to fight weight stigma and to really advocate for better care for people living with obesity.
Mm, could not agree more. It feels like whiplash kind of as a patient, even in the moment that we're in today, and this is, again, I'm going to talk a little bit about my lived experience, is like, oh my God, there's these potential solutions that are available to me. Fantastic. I would love to explore those. Okay, we're gonna, but you're using it off label, so let's keep it all under the radar as much as possible. And now there's this shortage of medication, and the pop culture world is telling me that I am now taking medication away from somebody who's worthy. And again, all just because I can't control myself. Like, that is baloney pants. I want everybody to hear that part really loud. That is not really the moment that we are in. There's still a ton of work to do, and it is going to take, to your point, Dr. Socklingham, like a collective voice to help us get there. But it is so frustrating to have these solutions right here and not be able to make the difference in accessing the change. I don't even really have a question in this. I just have a vent, apparently, about this one. But I do think it all circles back to finding the right evidence-based information and helping that evidence-based information, which that is not a sexy title. We get it. We understand why people are less attracted to the science than the pop culture side of things. But Ian, let's go there and talk a little bit about like getting towards and connecting with that evidence-based information so that we really can be that informed and empowered patient.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a little bit already today about the power of having an informed patient, and someone being, I guess if we look at this world we live in now, we've talked about how it's exciting with obesity and the knowledge that's coming out, and we know so much more now than we did 10, 15 years ago in obesity. But it takes a long time for that knowledge to trickle down to everyone that it needs to, and that includes the health professionals. And we already talked about that with Dr. Sajwani, about how there's lots of doctors out there who just simply haven't had the education. They haven't been taught about obesity in med school training, and then it's not something that has been picked up along the way. So even though we have these guidelines and we have the evidence and all that stuff, it just hasn't filtered down. So sometimes even having that conversation with a healthcare professional, whether it's a doctor or a dietitian or anyone else, can be really, really challenging. I have people in our community that come to me and say, they heard about a particular, maybe they wanted to go and ask about bariatric surgery, or they wanted to ask about a particular treatment, and their doctor is essentially told them, I don't believe in obesity treatment. I don't believe in obesity medications. And for me, like, my hair stands up on the back of my neck, and it gets me real angry. Like, how do you not believe in an evidence-based treatment? Like, that doesn't really line up. But it just goes to show that those conversations, those things still need to happen. And I think, getting mad and kicking doors down is sometimes necessary, but not all the times. I think sometimes we got to go in with soft gloves and kind of work as a team to learn about all this new stuff that's coming out, and learn about obesity management. So having those conversations with the doctors, I think, is something that I think we need to get better at. And I was wondering if maybe, Candice, if this is something that you talk about with the people that you see. Do they come and ask you, like, about how do I talk about, whether it's regain or something like that after surgery, or those sorts of things? Like, how do they bring that up with their health professionals? Rather than, like, we've already talked about with family and friends, but, like, is it a different conversation with the health professional side?
One of the things that's, I think, a bit different if working at a bariatric center of excellence is a lot of times patients have already had a discussion with their healthcare provider, and sort of they're already at the stage where they're at the bariatric center. So it's a little bit different. But definitely, I think a few things I recommend, and anytime someone's going to a medical appointment, and this is also because I'm a very detailed oriented person, but I try to encourage people to be really well prepared before they go to the appointment. And this is, practical tips as well. But if you do want to look at things like the clinical practice guidelines that have a section for patients in there, if you do want to, I take notes during my medical appointments, or if I have any questions in advance, I jot them down, because I know that when I go into that appointment, It's going to be limited time, and they're probably going to address maybe 2 or 3 questions if they have that. So I kind of prioritize what are my goals, what are my top 2 or 3 most important goals in there, jot them down, and so that I can take notes as well during the appointment. Sometimes you can ask if a support person could come with you to the appointment, if they'll permit a support person to attend with you. And sometimes that can be a really good idea because you may hear something that I didn't, and vice versa, and you can kind of piece it together. And in examples that I've had in my personal life where sometimes there's been a miscommunication, I often call it a short circuit. So something may have been said, and I'm putting someone else in that position. I'm kind of, experiencing that. I'm not a big fan of conflict, first off, but I always think of Brene Brown, who really uses the adage of courage over comfort. And I assume first that the person meant no harm and that it could be simply a matter of lack of education or knowledge about something that I'm dealing with. And also, reflecting back, and if I am ready in that place to use some advocacy or courage to say, you probably didn't intend this, but when you said this, or whenever whatever situation happened, this is what I experienced. And I'd say 99% of the time, the person is surprised when I say that and usually apologizes. They usually had no understanding or intention of that interaction going that way. And sometimes when I've hesitated to do that, it's been because of my sort of reluctance to engage in what I perceive to be conflict, but it's actually been a really positive talking point. And I always think that I'm also helping someone that's going after me, another patient potentially
Mm.
as well. And the same thing is true if I see something positive in an environment. I also call that out. So, when I go into an appointment and I see different size of blood pressure cuffs and they're in the same room, they don't have to go down the hallway to get me the larger blood pressure cuff or the larger gown or anything else to accommodate me. I don't have to, make any extra requests. I'll say to people, I really love it. Your office doesn't have your chairs don't have arms on them. I don't have to worry about if I'm going to fit in the chair. You have gowns that fit. You have different size gowns. All those things. It's important to tell people, I think, when they're doing things well as well. So, having those kind of conversations, being prepared, being on time, having questions ready if they're able to answer. I always ask a physician or a healthcare provider, how much time do we have together today? As well. So I know to kind of gauge that as well. So those are kind of tips I usually give patients because I think time is short with providers now, unfortunately, with the healthcare system sometimes. And being prepared, being informed, and following up, I think, is really important.
And really,
Yeah,
that's about being engaged in
that's
your care journey in ways that maybe we haven't before. But I love all of those things that you were just saying. And I also am reflecting back on what we were just talking about before that, about talking to our friends and family. And I think it's important to remember our patient community, to remind our patient community rather, that they're allowed to ask questions, that they
absolutely.
are allowed to challenge things. We would want to know who's coming to fix a broken window in our house. We would ask a couple questions, or we would check out ask some do our due diligence. But in the healthcare world, it often feels like, with that scarcity culture or whatever it is, and that, like, you're a level up than me, there's no place for that. And really there is. Very similarly to how you were describing, um, be explicit and specific about the care you're looking for,
Mhm.
you can do the same thing in these professional environments. So I love, even as simple as, how much time do we have today? So that I'm not feeling like you're itching to get out of here. We're both going to say that at the beginning, and we're both going to know where this appointment is going. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of
Really.
examples with my parents, for instance, right?
Yeah.
They never ask questions during an appointment. It could be generational as well. They're like, well, that's the doctor or whatever. I don't know anything. So I'm really trying to do education with them as well. I'm like, you do know something, and we can get prepared for
Hmm.
your appointment. And so there is that sort of feeling sometimes that, oh, they're the professional, they know more than I do, but really trying to bring it to a level playing field. And I'm the expert of my own body and my experience.
Yes.
And feeling empowered in that capacity, I think, is really important for patients, for sure.
I think that is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You brought something up that I just wanted to highlight, and you said, assume that they meant no harm. That little piece there is something that I think is really important because oftentimes when we get into these discussions about weight bias and stigma in healthcare, from the patient side, there's a lot of defensiveness and a lot of almost aggressiveness, right? Like these people are evil. They've treated us so poorly and in some cases they are really bad experiences, but I would argue that the majority of the ones we hear about are, like you suggested, ones that just simply don't know. And if they aren't told that they've done something that needs to be corrected or needs to be done differently or should, maybe be thought about a little bit differently, there's no way of that ever changing, right? They just go on about their way. They're trying to do their job and they're not intending to do harm. So having the courage and the ability to like just say that didn't feel right or it wasn't the right thing for you is important. And I imagine in a lot of cases, those health professionals would be willing to work with you and do something a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's
I
really
love it.
been positive. Absolutely.
One of my favorites that I often go to on repeat, and I'm sure many people have already heard it as well, is that people are entitled to their own opinions, but not their own facts. And that can be a really good place to anchor yourself in as well. And that really speaks to that being that informed patient and finding your voice. And as much as in healthcare situations, we don't want people to stay in situations where they aren't receiving the right kind of care. I think it's really important that we know, as this patient community, that we know better and we know differently about this disease of obesity, and to hold that line. And we're going to keep saying it, not just because I want to change necessarily your opinion, but I want to reinforce the fact that you are not changing mine. I have found the light. I have found what is truth. I have found the science and the evidence-based information. Join me. Come with. So,
And
Ian, let's
really,
talk about how we can empower those people. Oh, sorry, Candace, go for it. If
oh,
you got
sorry.
something to add.
Yeah, I was just
No.
gonna just say what you're saying too. It's about collaboration. It's a partnership and collaboration. When it's most effective, it's when you're collaborating. That's something that's really key at our clinic too. We really talk about collaboration, right? So when you're collaborating, you have respect and it's a respectful communication. And I'm the first one to, if I say something or if I offend someone or what, I want to know that as a provider. I want to learn from that opportunity. And I think that's how we grow as professionals, for sure.
Love it. All right, Ian, let's talk about, so we've talked about that importance of finding our voice and understanding ourselves, understanding the information that is around us that we want to, and finding the right kinds of communities. How do we get people to truly move into their voice? How do we do that? And I know we've got an advocacy education series that we have. So maybe let's visit some of that framework and how we help people move into their voice a bit.
Yeah, it's so with the launch of the clinical practice guidelines in 2020, we created OC Connect, which is our peer support community that we've talked about so far. And so that's part of it, and that allows us to have a kind of a space where we can share this evidence-based information. So being armed with the right information is kind of step one. That's important. The advocacy course that we have in there kind of goes through a couple key things to help empower that individual. So, having a basic understanding of obesity as a chronic disease, the treatments, and those sorts of things. So the stuff we've talked about on this, today during this conference, the things that we've talked about previously in our webinars, those sorts of things, having just a basic level understanding of that so that you can have a conversation is really important. So that informed patient piece. So being informed, but also being willing to learn more, I think is also really important. So not going in thinking exactly what the right treatment is for you or what you need. that's I think Candace, you mentioned it. It's a partnership. It's something that you don't know everything. So you can be informed, but we need to work on this partnership with our health professionals.
And I'm going to
Um,
chime in there for a second as well and say we need to give, oh, Lord, love a donut. We need to give our healthcare practitioners the time and the space as well to process this new information. And we need to make it okay for people to update their beliefs and change their ways of giving care as well. We should change our opinions and the way that we approach things as we get new evidence and more insights and more information. That's okay. There's often a need in this world for us to be very black and white or have an opinion and then that is my opinion forever. Let's change that. Let's that make that part of this, collective change that we're pushing for as well. And let our doctors process some of this stuff too and then really assess the moments that we're in. So
yeah, and I
willing
think
to learn
that
more.
yeah, that goes to the next point though, but being patient but persistent, right? So you've got informed, and you're going to be willing to go have some of these conversations now. You got to be patient, like you said. There's got to be some time and space for things to evolve, and those sorts of things. But being persistent is important, right? Like it might not be something that works the first time around, but be persistent. And then, you know, talking about asking questions, we talked about you have a right to ask questions and collaborate and work with your health professionals. I guess I'd like to pause here for a second and ask our two health professionals on the panel here, what would be some of those questions that you have gotten from patients in your office, or what would be the type of ones that would kind of that you'd like to hear your patients come and ask if they're trying to get more information here or trying to change how things are being done? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think as part of this, I think the context that I work in are a bit unique because people are often seeking treatment in the context of obesity care. They're coming in for obesity treatment. So I have to say my own practice is a little biased, I would say, in that way. Like people are at a readiness level to have those conversations. I think, Ian, what you're referring to is maybe those circumstances where you might be in a healthcare setting for something other than obesity, and that you may have not even made that decision yet to have that discussion.
Sure.
And
Yeah, sure.
I think, in that one is, I would say the useful questions that I think as a healthcare provider would be. I mean, we have our 5 A's and how we train healthcare providers to introduce those discussions and ask. But if we're getting into a discussion for obesity care in some way, or that's partly on the agenda, and it's something a patient wants to explore with a healthcare provider, it would be useful to kind of understand from the healthcare provider if they've had a chance to treat people with obesity in that way, and like what's been their
Mm-hmm.
experience. Because sometimes many people have not been empowered to actually do that, and that's to the point that Candace made earlier on, and that some people may not even not know what they don't know, right? And they may not have even learned about obesity treatment or management. And that for itself would be useful information to help you figure out how, as a patient, how are you going to approach this relationship if someone's starting at ground zero of no knowledge about obesity, right? That's a different conversation than someone who wants to help. And again, to think about if there's someone who's had some experience, maybe to have a little bit of discussion about at least, and Candace alluded to this before, setting out an agenda about what you want to cover in in that appointment or meeting, and making obesity one of those things to talk about might be helpful, because it may also mean that the healthcare provider kind of quickly looks up, hopefully Obesity Canada website, but maybe another reputable website as well, to say like, what do I have to say and how do I approach this and what resources are before you enter the room. So kind of giving a heads up and giving them advance notice of something you want to talk about might be a way to have that relational kind of co-developed kind of partnership with a healthcare provider around this discussion. And I would say the last thing is, the same way that I hope that I am conveying curiosity and interest in understanding my patient. I would say patients can equally be as curious and understanding of their healthcare provider's experience, perspective on the matter as well in terms of obesity. Just a few points there. Yeah.
Yeah. No, awesome. That's great. Those are all great points. I don't know. Do you have anything to add, Candice, or you?
Those are great responses. I don't know if I have anything to add. I have so many questions when I meet with patients. One of them, more for patients, though, really sometimes trying to collaborate with them on expectations. If we're talking surgery or medical program, about what do you think this is going to bring you, right? In terms of this transition, what do you think is going to happen? And we can kind of break it down a little bit because, media or friends or all those things tells us if we lose weight, we'll be happy and we'll have the perfect partner, perfect job, perfect whatever, and all these things are going to improve. And, there's certain situations that may improve, but not everything magically gets better, right? And so for some
Mhm.
people, really, I ask often, what do you want to be able to do after this intervention versus what do you want to be able to weigh after this intervention? And trying to look at even jotting those down together and collaborating with the patient on some of those sort of goals. And people will tell me things. Oh, well, I want to be able to cut my toenails or be able to fit through a turnstile or a booth at a restaurant or go on an airplane and not have the flight attendant wave a seatbelt extender over their head asking who asked for that. Things like that. Sort of quality of life improvements, want to be able to sleep better. Those are really important things as well. So I'm very curious. So I also love when patients are curious and have questions for me as well. So
That's
um,
awesome.
yeah, I
So I think
really
it's
am
about
curious.
patients being able to bring questions and ask questions, but also be willing to think differently a little bit, challenge ourselves to open up new cupboards and things in our minds that maybe we weren't really willing to embrace or look at as closely before.
Mhm.
I love that. And then I know in addition to telling people we want them to be armed with questions, we really want them to
Yeah.
understand their rights as well.
Yeah. Absolutely, I'll see if I can pull it up. We have another resource, an infographic that is knowing your rights. And as a patient, you have a right. The basis of it is that you have a right to be treated with dignity and respect, and you also should have a right to be treated with evidence-based medicine if we're talking about interacting with healthcare professionals. So that's a really important piece there, and Candice touched on some of it in her talk. You have a right to have someone with you, a
Mhm.
trusted second person in there to support you, a support person. You have a right to find a second opinion, right? If you happen to disagree or if it's not the discussion that you'd like to have, you have the right to go and seek out another second opinion. And that's not always easy in the world we live in today, given that there's a shortage of doctors, and not everyone even has a family doctor and those sorts of things. But Obesity Canada does have our Obesity Care Finder tool, so there are physicians and health professionals and clinics that are in that tool that you can go and search, and at least those people, if they're in your area and you can access them, have a degree of obesity management training in there. So there are people out there that want to help and support and those sorts of things. So definitely important. And then also finding your allies. And so whether that's, joining a community like ROC Connect or another peer group, or having a coffee group with some friends or families, or, in a lot of cases, it'd be great to have some allies that are on your healthcare team. They should be considered allies and in partnership with you.
It's huge. And all of that, it really is about us wanting you guys, this patient community, to truly feel empowered, to feel heard, and to feel understood so that you can move forward. And Ian and I know that we're sometimes we're the exception to the rule in that we are both quite comfortable standing up and speaking. And we fully recognize that that ability to advocate for the larger community might not be what you are interested in. And that is 100% fine. Believe me when I say this. But what we really want is for you to be able to show up and advocate for yourself first and foremost. That is job one. If you then are in a place where you feel like you are able to extend that and join us and help create more systemic change, or able to share your voice, that's fantastic. But truly, it is about advocating for yourself, for showing up for yourself, probably for the first time in a really long time, um, to get the support, care, and change that you're looking for in life. That was me being on a soapbox for a minute, but I want people to really, really get that part, because I know this whole section is all about, make yourself be heard. And I want to make sure everybody gets it's not necessarily on a stage in front of hundreds of people. It really is as simple as making that connection in the room.
I think, like you said, Lisa, that's a really important point because a lot of times people feel like they don't matter, that they don't want to advocate for themselves, that this is my fault, that I've internalized shame, and why would I advocate for myself, or not for everybody, but for some people,
Mhm.
if you've been living in that sort of cycle of it, really having that self-compassion. And when I joined OC, it was to advocate for my patients, right? I, like Ian said, I put other people before myself, and really the stories about myself that I was ashamed of, I now use to advocate. So
Mm.
it's kind of come full circle.
That's
For
huge.
sure.
And that's powerful. Stories
Absolutely.
really are what move the world
Absolutely.
around. I really truly believe that those that tell the stories rule the world. It's one of my favorite quotes. So we're at
Absolutely.
such an interesting time in obesity care and obesity management. To kind of bring our session home, I'd love to ask both of you, like, what excites you about this moment, and what do you really hope for the future of obesity care in Canada? No pressure.
Go ahead, Sanjeev.
Candace, do you want to go, or who wants to go first?
Do you want me to go first, Candace?
Yes, go ahead.
So I say what
We're just
excites me the
people.
most.
It's all good.
I know, I know. What excites me the most is that there is a growing movement and awareness of obesity as a chronic medical condition, as with the science and evidence and treatments becoming available. And I think now is our moment to work together with people living with obesity, healthcare providers uh, who are engaged in caring for people with obesity, to make our voices heard and to be able to advocate together in partnership together. And for me, that signals that there's been a little bit of a movement in this area, but we're at a tipping point now to really make it known. And this is really a tremendous opportunity to share the knowledge, the passion, the stories, to inspire people to come forward for treatment, and to inspire policymakers and governments to step up to meet the needs of obesity
Yeah,
worldwide. And so, for me, it's a bit of passion and hope are the two words that I take forward as part of
I love it.
I agree 100%.
I
100%. I really think this is an optimistic time and that we are starting to see changes. And I really think that we're going to see good changes. And I think by continuing conversations like these and really practicing self compassion, talking to each other, that's how we're going to continue movement. And, in terms of Obesity Canada, when I started volunteering for Obesity Canada, I was always told we will never ask you to do anything that you don't feel comfortable with. And they've never led me astray that way. So, there are all kinds of ways you can advocate in your community or for people too. So, and it's a great community. So I'm really, really privileged to be part of that. I'm really, really privileged to be part of where I work as well. And for the colleagues that are watching me today and my friends and family. So it's awesome. It's really
love
passionate
it.
area of
one.
study. Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
it. Thank you both for taking the time today to join Ian and I in this panel discussion. I think it was a really good one. I hope everybody out there took something from this. So, thank you both for your time. Thank you for what you do every day to help us try and make this collective change around the narrative of obesity, and for being who you guys are, because you really are both shining examples that give us hope, that there is going to be even a brighter and better tomorrow. So, thank you both. I'm really excited because now we're going to move into a session where we're actually going to talk about this in action as well, with a lived experience. So thank you both for your time.